The honeymoon in Washington is over, and it didn't end quietly. Behind closed doors, tensions are boiling. Power struggles are growing. And now, one of the most respected defensive minds in football is reportedly at odds with his own front office. Dan Quinn didn't come to the Commanders to be a figurehead, but that's exactly what this situation is starting to feel like. And if these reports are true, the Commanders may already be heading toward another reset before their rebuild has even begun. Welcome to NFL Snapwire. Let's get into it. The Washington Commanders limped through a brutal 5-12 season, one that exposed flaws far deeper than just the win-loss column. Injuries, inconsistent quarterback play, and a defense that failed to live up to expectations all played a role. But according to insiders, the real damage happened off the field. NFL insider Jordan Schultz dropped a bombshell report revealing that Dan Quinn and the Commanders' front office are in major disagreement over control of the coaching staff and personnel decisions. And this isn't a recent development. Sources say part of the issue the Commanders have had in the building is the front office meddling with the coaching staff on personnel and which players to use, Schultz reported. That single line tells you everything you need to know. This wasn't just about wins and losses. This was about authority. When Washington hired Dan Quinn, the expectation was clear. He wasn't just coming in as a locker room motivator or a defensive consultant. Quinn was hired to establish structure, accountability, and, most importantly, his vision. But behind the scenes, that vision appears to have clashed with executives who wanted a heavier hand in football decisions. And here's where things get complicated. Despite the ugly 5-12 record this season, sources say disagreements between Quinn and the front office actually date back to 2024, a year many inside the organization considered successful relative to expectations. Even then, friction existed over which players should be featured, how rotations were handled, and who ultimately had the final say on Sundays. Fast forward to now, and the situation has escalated. The Commanders recently moved on from both their offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator, a massive shakeup that typically signals a coach asserting control. But instead of unity, the firings reportedly intensified internal disputes. Dan Quinn, a coach known for loyalty and consistency, wanted staff members who aligned with his system and philosophy. The front office? According to insiders, they wanted influence over who stayed, who went, and which players got priority reps. That's a recipe for dysfunction. Let's be clear, front offices should have input. Analytics, long-term planning, roster value, all of that matters. But when executives start dictating lineups, snap counts, and scheme personnel, it undermines the head coach's authority in the locker room. Players notice that. Coaches notice that. And once that trust fractures, it's nearly impossible to repair. Dan Quinn has been through this before. In Atlanta, he experienced the pressure of balancing front office expectations with on-field realities. He knows what happens when alignment disappears, and that's why this situation is so concerning. Multiple league sources suggest Quinn is frustrated, not emotional, not reactive, but deeply concerned about whether he can actually build what he was promised when he took the job. And from the front office perspective, there's pressure too. Washington is desperate to prove it's finally turned the page from decades of instability. New leadership, new branding, and new optimism were supposed to define this era. A 5-12 season, paired with internal power struggles, threatens to undo all of that progress. The biggest question now is simple, but dangerous. Who's really in charge? If Dan Quinn doesn't have final say over his staff and game day personnel, his role becomes symbolic rather than authoritative. And that's when head coaches start quietly exploring exit options, whether that's through trades, mutual decisions, or sudden organizational changes. And no, this doesn't mean Quinn is on the hot seat tomorrow. But it does mean the Commanders are standing at a crossroads. They can either empower their head coach and allow him to fully implement his vision, or they can continue down a path that has derailed countless regimes before him. NFL history is brutally clear on this. Teams that win have alignment. Teams that lose argue behind closed doors. Right now, Washington looks closer to the second category. What happens next will define the franchise's next 5 years. If Quinn gets the control he wants, expect a quieter offseason focused on culture building, defensive identity, and disciplined roster development. If he doesn't, don't be surprised if this tension spills into public view and accelerates yet another reset. Because in the NFL, disagreement isn't the problem. Power struggles are. And Washington has been losing those battles for far too long. That's it for today on NFL Snapwire. If you want real stories behind the headlines, smart breakdowns, and no-nonsense NFL insight, hit that subscribe button and stay locked in. We'll keep watching Washington because this situation is far from over.